In the Lord always. Again I will say rejoice. Alleluia. 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 The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 7th chapter. Glory to you, Lord. From Gennesaret, Jesus arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house, and would not have anyone know it, yet he could not be hid. But immediately a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an unclean spirit heard of him, and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children first be fed, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this saying you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, to the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech. And they besought him to lay his hand upon him. And taking him aside from the multitude privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And his ears were opened. His tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And he charged them to tell no one. But the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, "He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the dumb speak." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Grace, peace, and much joy to you, people of God. Jesus provides bread for thousands. The Pharisees who argued with him last week are more concerned about whether you wash your hands before you eat bread. And today, crumbs. Last Sunday, we heard Jesus radicalize and deepen the understanding of purity and impurity. He said it's not a matter of the Old Testament laws about what you can touch that might make you unclean and how you might purify yourself and sanctify your own life. Jesus said it's deeper than that. It has to do with a pure heart, or the impure things that come pouring out of our hearts. He said that's what defiles us. And now he heads off into Gentile country. Tyre and Sidon, that's ancient Phoenicia, modern Lebanon up north, and then to the area east of the Sea of Galilee, the Decapolis, the 10 cities, Gentile cities on the east side of the sea. But as he makes this Gentile mission, he seems, as the first thing he does, to take back the openness that seemed to be the hallmark of last Sunday's teaching. But it's not a matter of obeying the details of the law of Moses that makes the Jewish people, God's ancient people, distinct and able to be seen as God's own people, but rather a matter of a purity or impurity deep within us that we think would be accessible to everyone. A woman, even in this far region, has heard of Jesus. We know that faith comes from hearing, right? And she has faith. She comes, she calls him Lord, she kneels at his feet, she asks him to help not herself, but her daughter, possessed by an unclean spirit. And Jesus says, it's not right to take the bread of the children of Israel and feed it to Gentile dogs. This is not what we expect from Jesus. And there's been lots of ink spilled about why he did this. Well, he was tired, some of the commentators say. You know, he did go up there and didn't want anybody around him, and you know how it is when you try to get away and then all of a sudden here's somebody asking, for your attention again, and you really just want to say, go away from me. He was tired. That's one possibility. We don't really like to think of that being Jesus' approach either. Another very popular one is, he was testing her. So let's try that on each other. I'll say something really mean to you, and it's just to test you, so don't get angry. We don't really think that that's probably the right one either. And then, of course, the third possibility is that Jesus' mission really is only to Israel. And it's only after the resurrection that everything's broadened out and it becomes, mission to the whole world. That doesn't seem right either. Because, of course, Jesus is the Messiah of the God of Israel. But part of that calling is to be a light to all the nations. That's good, solid Old Testament stuff too, just like the purity codes. And so, I'll just be honest with you, I don't know why Jesus said this to her. But I think I know why she said what she said back to him. Regardless of Jesus' motives, he characterized this woman as a dog. But she doesn't get angry at it. She doesn't argue with him. She accepts the metaphor and uses it to continue persevering in faith and asking for Jesus' help for her daughter. Yes, Lord, the children must first be fed. Salvation is from the Jews. We know that. But not only for the Jews. When the children of Israel have eaten, there is food left over. Remember, after the feeding miracle, Jesus tells the disciples to gather up the klasmata, the fragments. There is food left over. And the woman points out that when the children eat, sometimes crumbs fall on the floor. And when that happens, even the family's little dogs, the Canarion, get fed. For saying this, Jesus says, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter. Jesus heals the daughter at a distance with a word. He speaks and it is done. Then we have another miracle story. So very different. I mean, still in Gentile territory, again, people bringing someone else, asking Jesus, as the woman did for her daughter, asking Jesus to help someone else, in this case a deaf man who can't speak clearly, as is so often true for those who are deaf from birth. If you can't hear other people speaking, it's very difficult to learn to speak clearly on your own. And this miracle is so different. It's so earthy. Instead of healing at a distance with a word, it's fingers stuck in ears and spittle on the tongue, and Jesus looking up to heaven and sighing, and then saying what almost seems like a magic word, the Aramaic word Ephphatha, be opened. Why did Jesus choose this incredibly earthy, bodily way of healing this man? Once again, I confess that I don't know. I think it has something to do with the resurrection of the body. The things that the Messiah does, the signs that we heard from Isaiah 35 of the coming messianic reign, the approach of the King of God's kingdom, the Messiah, is the opening of the eyes of the blind, the ears of the deaf, the lame leaping, the speechless singing for joy. Those are all bodily things. And so sticking the fingers in the ear and putting spittle on his tongue, it's all very earthy, it's all very bodily. We're not Gnostics. We're not trying to be separated from our bodies. We are created as body and soul. And we will be raised body and soul. Jesus' healing miracles are signs of that great healing, that great feeding, that great cleansing, which is our final destination, which is God's final will for us. And even now, we are called to live out of our faith in that reality. And that's why we hear from James today, that we ought not show partiality in our dealings with each other. And this not because of some abstract notion or some ideological construct, but because this is the way God is. In Acts 10, Peter says, I understand, God shows no partiality. In Romans 2, Paul says, God shows no partiality. And so here James says, if you show partiality, then you are departing from the law of the kingdom, the royal law. It is as though James is saying to all of us what Jesus said to the deaf man, Ephphatha, be opened. Do not judge one another on the basis of some construct or idea that comes from this compartmentalized, flattened, secular world. There's a deeper level on which God understands us and on which we are called to understand one another. Not little compartments, but like God, judging without partiality. That's what James means when he asks that rhetorical question, can faith save you? Don't do the knee-jerk Lutheran reaction, of course it can. Because what James is talking about here is a kind of a compartmentalized faith believing all kinds of true things about God, but not letting that touch my life in any way. Our primary Lutheran confessional document, the Augsburg Confession, says in Article 5 that we do in fact receive saving faith through the Word, through the Word and the sacraments, the ministry of the gospel. But it goes on in Article 6 to say, and we live this faith out in a new obedience. The obedience of faith. A faith that is not lived is not a living faith. A faith, a life that shows partiality, is not really a life open to the gospel, but a compartmentalized life, trying to figure out what God's rules are and not go afoul of them. But we end up following the rules that are laid down for us by this flattened, compartmentalized, secular world, which is always willing to tell us what the rules are. And James says, be imitators of God, not of the world. Be imitators of the Christ, the Messiah, who, yes, comes out of Israel, but as a sign that God so loves the world that he gave his Son. In the Messiah, God enters into human history, not just into the history of Israel, that holy history that we revere, but into the history of all human beings of every time and every place, and he shows us our final destiny. Even in these signs that are hard to understand. Jesus goes up into Gentile territory. And in fact, he does, in strange and paradoxical ways, show the openness of the God of Israel to accepting all of us without partiality. And calls us to be bold enough to do the same. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.